The gunshot that split the night air wasn't meant for Willa Edwards, but the bullet that tore through her father's wagon wheel told her it might as well have been. She crouched low in the darkness, her hands pressed against the splintered wood as her father shouted at the horses to keep moving. They were 2 days outside of Denver, Colorado territory, in the summer of 1872, and the bandits had been following them since sunset. Her father, a gambling man who had made more enemies than friends, had finally run out of luck. The wagon lurched violently as another wheel gave way, sending them careening off the rough mountain road. Willa felt herself thrown clear, her body hitting the hard ground with force that knocked the wind from her lungs. When she opened her eyes, the world was silent except for the ringing in her ears. She pushed herself up slowly, tasting blood and dirt. The wagon lay on its side 20 feet away, one wheel still spinning lazily. Her father was nowhere to be seen, and the bandits' voices were getting closer through the trees. Willa had never known protection in her 19 years of life. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had dragged her from town to town, one failed scheme after another, always running from someone or something. She had learned to stay quiet, to make herself small, to never expect anyone to stand between her and danger. She scrambled to her feet and ran into the darkness of the pine forest, branches tearing at her dress and skin. Behind her, she heard the bandits reach the wagon, heard them shouting about the missing girl. Her lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the wilderness, no idea where she was going, knowing only that she had to get away. The terrain grew steeper, and her legs began to shake with exhaustion. She had no food, no water, no weapon, and the thin cotton dress she wore would do nothing against the cold mountain night. When her foot caught on a root, she went down hard, rolling several feet down an embankment before coming to rest against a fallen log. She lay there gasping, listening for sounds of pursuit. The voices had faded, but that brought little comfort. She was alone in the wilderness with night falling fast around her. Tears finally came then, hot and bitter. She had survived 19 years of neglect and indifference, but she wasn't sure she would survive this night. That was when she heard the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming through the trees above her. Willa held her breath and pressed herself against the log, trying to become invisible. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a confidence that spoke of someone who knew these mountains well. The dying light caught his features as he looked down at her, and Willa saw a man with shoulder-length dark hair, a thick beard, and eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. His buckskin shirt strained against heavily muscled arms and chest, and he carried a rifle with the ease of someone who had used it often. "You hurt?" His voice was deep and rough from disuse, but not unkind. Willa couldn't find her voice. She just stared up at him, waiting for him to decide her fate the way everyone else in her life had always decided it for her. He lowered himself down the embankment with surprising grace for such a large man, and crouched beside her. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 27 or 28, with weathered skin that spoke of years in the sun and wind. His eyes, she realized, were a striking pale blue, almost gray in the fading light. "Can you stand?" he asked when she didn't answer his first question. She nodded and tried to push herself up, but her ankle gave way beneath her and she cried out in pain. His hands shot out instantly, steadying her, and she flinched at the contact. She had learned that men's hands usually brought pain or demands. But he simply held her steady until she found her balance, then released her immediately. "Ankles twisted," he said, as if stating a simple fact. "There's men with guns about a mile east of here, shouting about searching for someone. That you there looking for?" "They killed my father," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or I think they did. The wagon crashed and I ran." The mountain man's jaw tightened slightly, the only indication that her words affected him at all. "They'll search until dark, then make camp and start again at first light." "Can't have you out here then." It wasn't a question but a statement of fact, as if her safety had suddenly become his responsibility without any discussion needed. "I don't have anywhere to go," Willa said, hating how weak and helpless she sounded. "You do now." He straightened to his full height, which had to be well over 6 feet, and looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Name's Holden James. I've got a cabin about 3 miles north of here. You'll stay there until we figure out what's what." Before she could respond or protest, he bent and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. Willa gasped and instinctively grabbed at his shoulders, feeling solid muscle beneath her hands. No one had ever carried her before, had ever handled her with such casual strength combined with such obvious care not to jostle her injured ankle. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Not on that ankle, you can't. And we need to cover ground fast before those men spread their search." He began moving through the darkening forest with sure steps, somehow navigating the rough terrain while carrying her as if she were no burden at all. Willa had no choice but to hold on, her arms around his neck, feeling the heat radiating from his body as the mountain air grew colder. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, unaffected by the exertion of carrying her uphill through difficult terrain. His beard was close enough that she could see threads of lighter brown among the dark, and there was a scar along his jawline that disappeared into the beard. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability, of someone who needed nothing and no one. "I'm Willa Edwards," she finally said, feeling like she should at least introduce herself to this stranger who had decided to rescue her. "I know," he said simply. "Heard those men shouting it." They traveled in silence after that, Holden moving steadily through the forest as darkness fell completely around them. Willa had no idea how he could see where he was going, but he never stumbled, never hesitated. She found herself relaxing slightly against his chest, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, strong and reassuring in a way that nothing in her life had ever been. When she next opened her eyes, not realizing she had dozed off, there was lamplight flickering through trees ahead. Holden carried her into a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood, smoke rising from its chimney. It wasn't large, but it looked solid and well built, with a small barn to one side and what appeared to be a smokehouse beyond that. Everything about the place spoke of careful maintenance and self-sufficiency. He carried her inside without breaking stride, kicking the door shut behind him with his boot. The interior was a single large room with a stone fireplace, a bed built into one corner, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and tools, and furs covering the floor. It was sparse but clean, the home of someone who lived alone and liked it that way. Holden set her down gently on the bed, which was covered with more furs and a thick wool blanket. "Stay off that ankle," he ordered, already moving to light more lamps. "I'll get some water heating. You'll need to clean those cuts and we'll wrap the ankle tight." Willa sat on the bed, feeling dazed and overwhelmed. She watched as he moved efficiently around the cabin, building up the fire, filling a pot with water from a barrel near the door, gathering clean cloth from a trunk. His movements were economical and practiced, those of someone who had taken care of himself for a long time. The muscles in his back and shoulders rippled beneath his shirt as he worked, and Willa found herself unable to look away. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. He glanced at her, those pale eyes unreadable. "Because you need help. That's all. That's enough." He brought a cup of water to her and waited while she drank it, then took the cup back. "When's the last time you ate?" Willa had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think." His jaw tightened again, that subtle sign of displeasure. He went to the shelves and returned with dried meat, bread, and cheese, setting them on the bed beside her. "Eat." She wanted to argue, to say she didn't need his charity, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She took the food and ate slowly while he went back to tending the water. When it was warm, he brought a basin and clean cloths to the bedside and knelt in front of her. "This'll sting," he warned, then began carefully cleaning the cuts and scrapes on her hands and arms. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such large, calloused hands. He worked with the focused attention of someone who had tended wounds before, his face close to hers, as he examined a particularly deep cut on her forearm. Willa watched him work, this stranger who had appeared out of the darkness and decided her safety mattered. "Those men," she said quietly, "they'll be looking for me. Let them look." His voice was flat, final. "They won't find this place, and if they do, they'll wish they hadn't." There was no bravado in his words, just simple certainty. Willa believed him. Everything about Holden James suggested a man who could back up any promise he made with action. When he finished with her cuts, he moved to her ankle, unlacing her worn boot carefully and easing it off. His hands were firm but gentle as he examined the swelling joint, his fingers probing carefully to determine the extent of the injury. "Not broken," he announced, "but you'll be off it for a few days at least." He wrapped it tightly with strips of cloth, his movements sure and practiced. When he finished, he stood and looked down at her, and for the first time, something that might have been uncertainty crossed his face. "You'll take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep on the floor." "I can't take your bed," Willa protested. "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "That ankle needs to be elevated, and you need proper rest. I've slept on harder surfaces than this floor." He was already gathering furs to make himself a pallet near the fire. Willa watched him, this mountain man who had made her safety his priority without question or hesitation. She had never experienced anything like it in her entire life. Her father had kept her fed and clothed mostly, but she had always been an afterthought at best, a burden at worst. And now this stranger was giving up his bed, tending her wounds and preparing to sleep on the floor to guard her through the night. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Holden paused in his work and looked at her for a long moment. "When I was 15, he said slowly, as if the words didn't come easy, "my family was traveling west. We got caught in a late spring snowstorm in these mountains. My mother, my sister, my little brother, they all died because I couldn't protect them. My father died trying to save them. I survived because I was out hunting when the worst of it hit." He returned to arranging the furs, his movements deliberate. "I couldn't help them, but I can help you." The raw honesty in his words struck Willa silent. She understood then that this wasn't charity or obligation. This was about Holden's own demons, his own need to protect someone when he hadn't been able to protect the people he loved. She should probably have been bothered by that, should have felt used somehow. But instead, she felt something she had never felt before, safe. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin, then moved to bank the fire for the night. "Get some sleep. We'll figure out your situation come morning." Willa lay back on the bed, her body sinking into the furs, and watched as Holden extinguished all but one lamp. He settled onto his pallet near the fire, his rifle within easy reach, positioned between the door and where she lay. Even in the dim light, she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the length of his frame. He had placed himself as a barrier between her and any threat that might come through that door. For the first time in 19 years, Willa Edwards went to sleep feeling protected. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, then it all came flooding back. She pushed herself up carefully, her ankle throbbing but bearable. Holden stood at the fireplace, cooking breakfast with the same efficient movements he had shown the night before. His hair was damp, suggesting he had already been down to the creek to wash, and he had changed into a clean shirt that somehow seemed even tighter across his broad chest and shoulders than the one from yesterday. "How's the ankle?" he asked without turning around. "Better. Still hurts, but better." "Good." He brought her a plate of food and a cup of coffee, then returned to the fire to get his own. Instead of sitting at the table, he pulled one of the chairs closer to the bed and sat there, as if he still needed to be close enough to protect her from any threat. They ate in silence for a while, Willa trying not to stare at him in the morning light. He was even more imposing in daylight, all hard muscle and weathered strength. His hands dwarfed the tin cup he held, and she noticed several scars on his forearms, marks of a hard life lived in an unforgiving place. "I need to go check on some traps," he said when they had finished eating. "And I'll scout around, make sure those men have moved on. You'll stay here. Bar the door after I leave and don't open it for anyone but me." "How will I know it's you?" Willa asked. "I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. Don't open it otherwise." He stood and began gathering supplies, strapping on a knife belt and taking down his rifle. "There's more food on the shelves if you get hungry. Keep off that ankle as much as you can." He moved to the door, then paused and turned back to her. "I mean what I said. Don't open this door for anyone else. Anyone." The intensity in his eyes made her nod quickly. "I won't." He studied her for another moment, as if assessing whether she could be trusted to follow his instructions, then nodded and left. Willa heard him give instructions to what sounded like a horse in the barn, then his footsteps faded into the forest. She sat on the bed, listening to the silence of the cabin, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. Her father was dead. She was alone in the world with no money, no family, no prospects. She was injured in a mountain man's cabin, dependent on the kindness of a stranger who seemed to have made her safety his personal mission. None of it made sense, yet here she was. Willa spent the day resting as ordered, though she did venture to the window several times to look out at the clearing. The cabin was situated in a small valley, surrounded by pine trees and rocky slopes. It was isolated but beautiful, peaceful in a way that was foreign to her. She had spent her life in towns and on dusty roads, always moving, always on the run. This stillness was both comforting and unsettling. It was late afternoon when she heard the distinctive knock pattern Holden had described. She hobbled to the door, her ankle protesting every step, and lifted the heavy wooden bar. Holden stepped inside, his arms full of rabbits and what looked like provisions. "The men are gone," he said without preamble. "Headed south toward Palisade. I went to where your wagon crashed. Your father's dead. I buried him." The words hit Willa like a physical blow. She had known it was likely, but hearing it confirmed made it real. She sank down onto the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. Tears came, but they weren't entirely for grief. Her father had never been cruel, but he had never been kind either. She mourned for what might have been more than for what was. Holden set down his burden and moved to her side, kneeling so he was at eye level with her. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "He wasn't a good father," Willa admitted through her tears, "but he was all I had. I know." His hand hovered near her shoulder as if he wanted to offer comfort but didn't know if it would be welcome. "I salvaged what I could from the wagon. Wasn't much. Some clothes, a few personal items. Nothing of value that I could see." Willa shook her head. "There wouldn't have been. We never had anything of value. That's why he was always running, always scheming, always trying to find the next big score that never came. She wiped at her tears roughly, angry at herself for crying over a man who had never really seen her as anything more than an inconvenience. Holden stood and moved to the supplies he had brought in, giving her space to collect herself. When she had regained some composure, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression that might have been understanding. "What happens now?" she asked. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go." Holden was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. "You stay here until you're healed. After that, we'll figure something out." "I can't impose on you indefinitely," Willa protested. "You're not imposing." His voice was firm. "I have plenty of supplies, plenty of space. You stay until you're ready to go. End of discussion." It should have bothered her, his presumption that he could simply decide her fate. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her this was about more than just hospitality. This was about his need to protect, to keep safe what he hadn't been able to keep safe before. And if she was honest with herself, she had no better options. Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. Holden would wake before dawn, cook breakfast for both of them, then head out to check traps, hunt, or work on various projects around his property. He always made sure Willa had everything she needed before he left, and he always returned by mid-afternoon, as if he couldn't bear to leave her alone for too long. In the evenings, they would share dinner and he would tend to her ankle, checking her progress with the same gentle efficiency he had shown that first night. Willa began to notice small things about him. The way he always positioned himself between her and the door. How he would pause in whatever he was doing to listen, whenever there was an unusual sound outside. The way his jaw would tighten whenever she tried to do something on her own that he deemed too risky. He was hyper-vigilant about her safety in a way that should have been overwhelming but somehow wasn't. On the fourth day, her ankle had improved enough that she could walk without severe pain. She insisted on helping with dinner preparations, despite Holden's protests. He hovered nearby as she worked, ready to catch her if she stumbled, and she found herself acutely aware of his presence. He took up so much space, not just physically but in every other way. When he was in the cabin, he was impossible to ignore. "You don't have to watch me like that," she said, trying to sound annoyed but failing to hide her amusement. "I'm just cutting vegetables, not scaling a mountain." "You're still injured," he said, as if that explained everything. "The ankle is much better. You did a good job with it." He made a non-committal sound and continued to watch her work. Willa shook her head, oddly charmed by his stubborn protectiveness. They prepared the meal together in companionable silence, moving around each other in the small space. Willa was surprised by how natural it felt, how easily they seemed to work in tandem. That evening, after they had eaten and Holden had checked her ankle one more time, they sat by the fire. It was the first time they had really spent time together without the excuse of injury or necessity, and Willa found herself curious about the man who had saved her life. "How long have you been up here?" she asked. 12 years. Since I was 16. He stared into the fire, his face half in shadow. "After my family died, I stayed in these mountains. Didn't see the point in going anywhere else. That's a long time to be alone. I prefer it that way." But there was something in his voice that suggested it wasn't entirely true. "People are complicated. Out here, things are simple. You work, you survive, you don't have to worry about anyone else." "Except now you're worrying about me," Willa pointed out gently. He looked at her then, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "That's different." "How?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because you needed help," he finally said. "Because I couldn't leave you out there to die. Because—" He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words. "Because of your family," Willa finished softly. Because of my family, he agreed. And because it's the right thing to do. A man protects what's in his care. That's how it should be. Willa felt something shift in her chest, some emotion she couldn't quite name. No one has ever protected me before, she admitted. My father never hit me or anything like that, but he never really saw me either. I was just there, following him from town to town, watching him lose what little money we had. I learned early not to expect anyone to take care of me. Holden's jaw tightened in that way it did when he was displeased. That's not right. You should have had someone looking out for you. Well, I have you now, she said, trying to lighten the mood, at least for a little while. Something flickered across his face, an expression she couldn't read. Yeah, he said quietly. You do. The next morning, Willa woke to find Holden already gone, but he had left a note on the table. He had ridden down to Palisade to get supplies and to ask around about her father's affairs. He instructed her to stay inside and keep the door barred. The note was signed simply with an H. Willa spent the morning tidying the cabin, feeling restless and a bit useless. Her ankle was healing well, and she hated the idea of being dependent on Holden's charity any longer than necessary. She needed to figure out what she was going to do with her life. She had no skills beyond basic cooking and cleaning, no education beyond what she had taught herself. Her options were severely limited. By the time Holden returned in late afternoon, she had worked herself into a state of mild panic about her future. He took one look at her face and set down his packages, his full attention immediately on her. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Did someone come by? No, nothing like that, Willa assured him quickly. I've been thinking about what I'm going to do. I can't stay here forever, and I have no money, no prospects. I don't know what happens next. Holden's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained intent on her face. I talked to some people in Palisade. Your father owed money to several people, but nothing that would follow you. As far as anyone there is concerned, you died in the wagon crash with him. Oh, Willa wasn't sure how to feel about being officially dead. I also asked around about work for women in the area. There's a family near Palisade, the Mitchells, who are looking for help with their children and household. I told them I might know someone, but I didn't give your name. If you want, I can take you down to meet them next week when your ankle is fully healed. It was a solution, a practical and reasonable solution. So why did the thought of leaving this cabin, leaving Holden, make her chest feel tight? That's very kind of you, she managed. Thank you for asking around. He studied her for a moment longer, then seemed satisfied that she was truly all right. He began unpacking his supplies, setting out flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. He also pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper and handed it to her. What's this? Willa asked. New dress and some other things. Saw them in the general store and figured you could use them. Willa unwrapped the package to find a simple but sturdy blue cotton dress, new undergarments, stockings, and a warm shawl. They were practical items, nothing fancy, but they were new and clean and clearly chosen with care. Tears pricked at her eyes. Holden, I can't accept all this. I have no way to pay you back. Don't want you to pay me back. He was already moving away, busying himself with putting away supplies. You needed clothes. I got you clothes. You've already done so much for me. He turned to face her, and there was something almost fierce in his expression. Your safety is my responsibility now. That includes making sure you have what you need. I don't want to hear any more arguments about it. There it was again, that protective intensity that should have felt overbearing but instead made her feel cherished in a way she never had before. Thank you, she said softly. Truly, thank you for everything. His expression softened slightly and he nodded. You're welcome. Now, try on the dress and make sure it fits. If it doesn't, I'll take it back and get a different size." The dress fit well enough with some minor adjustments that Willa could make herself. That evening, wearing her new clothes and feeling more human than she had in days, she helped Holden prepare dinner again. They fell into an easy rhythm, and Willa found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she hadn't relaxed in years. Maybe ever. As they ate, Holden told her about his trip to Palisade, about the town gossip and the people he had spoken with. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise, and she found herself laughing at his observations about some of the more colorful town characters. When she laughed, his eyes would light up slightly, and she realized he was enjoying making her happy. After dinner, they sat by the fire again, and Willa felt bold enough to ask more questions. "Do you ever get lonely up here?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I got used to it. The quiet, the solitude. It's better than being around people who don't understand, who want things from you that you can't give." "What kind of things?" He was quiet for a moment. "There was a woman once, down in Palisade. She wanted me to move to town, to give up the mountains and be respectable. Wanted me to be someone I'm not. I tried for a while, but it didn't work. This is who I am." He gestured around the cabin. "This is where I belong." Willa could understand that. She had spent her whole life trying to be invisible, to not be a burden, to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. "I've never belonged anywhere," she said quietly. "We never stayed in one place long enough for me to put down roots. I don't even know what that would feel like. Must have been hard." It was what it was. You can't miss what you never had, right? Holden looked at her with an expression that might have been sadness. "You deserved better than that. Everyone deserves a place where they feel safe, where they belong. Like you have here. Like I have here," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Willa found herself studying the cabin with new eyes. It was simple but well made. Every item in its place, everything chosen for function rather than form. But there were small touches that suggested Holden was more than just a rough mountain man. Books on a shelf in the corner, well worn but carefully maintained. A carved wooden figure of a bear on the mantel, the work too skilled to be his own. A quilt on the bed that had clearly been made by a woman's hands, probably his mother's. "This is a good place," she said. "You've built a good life here." "It's enough," Holden said. But he was looking at her when he said it, not at the cabin, and something in his gaze made her heart skip. The days passed, each one much like the last, and Willa felt herself settling into the rhythm of life in the mountains. Her ankle healed completely, and she began taking on more of the household tasks, insisting that she needed to earn her keep. Holden protested at first, but she was stubborn, and eventually he relented. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Willa began to notice other things about Holden, small details that made him more real to her. The way he would sing softly to himself while working, old songs that might have been from his childhood. How he always made sure she ate first, taking the larger pieces of meat for himself only after she was served. The way he would watch the sky in the evenings, as if looking for signs of weather that only he could read. His hands, so large and strong, capable of bringing down game or building shelter, but also gentle when he helped her over rough ground or handed her a cup of coffee. She also noticed how he continued to make her safety his highest priority. He always checked the area around the cabin before she went outside. He taught her how to shoot his rifle, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself if he wasn't there. He made sure she knew where he was going whenever he left and approximately when he would return. If he was going to be longer than expected, he would push himself to get back faster rather than leave her alone overnight. "You don't have to do all this," she told him one evening after he had rushed back from checking distant traps, because he thought he might not make it before dark. "I'm not helpless. I can take care of myself for a few hours." "I know you can," he said, though his jaw tightened in that telltale way. "But why should you have to when I can make sure you're safe? Because it's not your responsibility." He turned to face her fully, his pale eyes intense. "Yes, it is. From the moment I found you in those woods, your safety became my responsibility. That doesn't change just because you're healed now. It doesn't change at all." Willa stared at him, her heart pounding. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that suggested this had become about more than just keeping a promise to himself about protecting people. "Holden," she said softly. He seemed to realize he had revealed too much. He turned away, his shoulders tense. "I'll start dinner." But Willa wasn't willing to let it drop. She moved closer to him, close enough that he had to acknowledge her presence. "Why does my safety matter so much to you?" "I told you why. Because of my family. I think it's more than that now." He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. "You should go meet that family near Palisade," he finally said. "Get that job, build a life. That's what makes sense." "That's not what I asked." He turned to face her then, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because somewhere along the way, keeping you safe stopped being about my family and started being about you. Because I wake up every morning thinking about you. Because I rush back here every evening so I don't have to spend one more minute away from you than necessary. Because the thought of you leaving, of you being somewhere I can't protect you, makes me feel like I can't breathe." He took a step back, as if trying to put distance between them. "But that's not fair to you. You don't owe me anything. You should go live your life, not stay trapped up here with someone who doesn't know how to be anything other than what he is." Willa's heart was racing, her mind spinning. She had felt something growing between them over these past weeks, but she had convinced herself it was just gratitude, just the natural closeness that comes from sharing space. But it was more than that, so much more. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked quietly. Holden stared at her. "What?" "What if I want to stay here? With you?" "Willa, you don't know what you're saying. You're grateful and that's natural, but I'm not just grateful, Holden. I mean, I am grateful, but it's more than that." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've never felt safe before. I've never had anyone make me feel like I mattered, like my well-being was important. You've done that. You've made me feel protected and valued and seen. And somewhere along the way, I started to care about you too. I care about your smile when you think I'm not looking. I care about how you always check on me before you sleep. I care about the way you sing to yourself when you think no one can hear. I care about you, Holden, not just what you've done for me, but who you are." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Holden's face was a mix of emotions, hope and fear, and something that looked like longing. "You could have a real life in town," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "A proper house, proper society, not this rough existence up in the mountains. I don't want proper society. I've never fit into that world anyway. Up here, I feel like I can breathe. I feel like I can be myself without having to apologize for it. And with you, I feel safe. For the first time in my entire life, I feel protected and cared for." She moved closer to him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "If you don't feel the same way, if this is truly just about your need to protect someone, then tell me and I'll go to Palisade. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I want to stay." Holden reached out slowly, as if giving her time to move away, and cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. "I feel more than a fraction," he said roughly. "I've been falling for you since the moment you looked up at me in those woods with those fierce eyes, determined not to show fear even though you were terrified. I tried to tell myself it was just about keeping you safe, but I was lying to myself. It's always been more than that. And then he kissed her, gentle despite his size and strength, his lips soft against hers. Willa melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath her fingers. The kiss deepened, and she felt his arms come around her, holding her close, keeping her safe even in this moment of vulnerability and connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Holden rested his forehead against hers. "If you stay, I'll spend every day making sure you're safe and happy. That's a promise. Your well-being will always be my highest priority." "I know," Willa whispered. "That's why I want to stay." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, and Willa felt something settle in her chest, some piece of herself that had always been adrift finally finding anchor. She was home. After 19 years of wandering, of never belonging, she had finally found where she was meant to be. The next few weeks were the happiest of Willa's life. She and Holden fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses while preparing meals, quiet conversations late into the night, and gentle touches that spoke of growing affection and desire. Holden continued to make her safety his priority, but now there was tenderness mixed with the protectiveness, a softness in his eyes when he looked at her that made her heart soar. They talked about their future, about making their arrangement permanent. Holden wanted to marry her properly, to make sure she had legal protection and the security of his name. They made plans to ride down to Palisade and find a preacher, to make their union official in the eyes of God and the law. But first, Holden insisted on making some improvements to the cabin. "If you're going to live here permanently, you need more space," he said. "I can add on a room, make a proper kitchen area, maybe build a better porch where we can sit in the evenings." Willa loved watching him work, loved seeing the care he put into making the cabin more comfortable for her. His muscles would flex and strain as he moved heavy logs, his shirt often discarded in the summer heat, and she would find herself staring at the play of sunlight on his bronzed skin. He would catch her looking sometimes and give her a rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face into something boyishly handsome. One afternoon, while Holden was working on the new addition, a group of men rode into the clearing. Willa was inside the cabin, but she heard the horses and looked out to see 4 rough-looking men dismounting near where Holden was working. Her heart began to pound. She recognized one of them from the night of the wagon crash. She grabbed the rifle Holden had taught her to use and positioned herself near the window, ready to help if needed but staying hidden as he had instructed her to do if there was ever trouble. Outside, Holden straightened slowly, his hand moving casually but deliberately toward the axe he had been using. "Help you gentlemen with something." His voice was calm, but Willa could hear the steel underneath. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his nose, looked around the clearing. "Heard there's a mountain man living up here. That you might be. Depends on what you want. We're looking for a girl. Dark hair, pretty thing. She disappeared a few weeks back after a wagon accident." "You see anyone like that around here?" "No." The lie came easily to Holden's lips. "I don't see many people up here. That's the point of living in the mountains." The scarred man didn't look convinced. "Mind if we take a look around?" "I do mind, actually." Holden's voice went even flatter, more dangerous. "This is private property. You've asked your question. I've given my answer. Time for you to leave." One of the other men stepped forward. "Now, we don't want any trouble. We're just looking for the girl. She might be hurt, might need help." "And I said I haven't seen anyone. Now get off my land." The tension in the clearing was thick enough to cut. Willa's hands tightened on the rifle, her heart pounding. She knew Holden could handle himself, but there were 4 of them and one of him. If they attacked, she would have to shoot, and she prayed her aim would be steady enough. The scarred man studied Holden for a long moment, taking in his size, the easy confidence in his stance, the axe held casually but ready to be used as a weapon. "You're awful protective of your privacy. That's why I live up here away from people." Holden's pale eyes were cold as winter ice. "Now, I'm going to say this one more time. Get off my land. If you're still here in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to assume you mean me harm and I'll respond accordingly." There was no bluff in his voice, no uncertainty. The men seemed to recognize they were dealing with someone who could and would back up his words with violence if necessary. The scarred man held up his hands in a placating gesture. All right, no need for hostility. We're going." They mounted their horses, but the scarred man paused before leaving. "If you do see this girl, there's money in it for you. She witnessed something she shouldn't have. We just want to ask her some questions. If I see anyone matching your description, I'll be sure to tell them to steer clear of you," Holden said flatly. The men rode off, and Holden didn't move until they were out of sight. Only then did he set down the axe and turn toward the cabin. Willa met him at the door, the rifle still in her hands. "They were the ones from that night," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "They're not looking for me because they think I need help. They want to make sure I don't tell anyone what I saw." Holden took the rifle from her and pulled her into his arms. "They're gone and they won't be back. They're cowards, looking for an easy target. When they saw they wouldn't find one here, they moved on. But what if they come back at night? What if they bring more men? Then I'll handle it." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Listen to me. I will not let anything happen to you, do you understand? I will protect you with my life if necessary." "That's what I'm afraid of," Willa whispered. "I don't want you getting hurt because of me." His jaw tightened. "That's not your choice to make. Your safety is my highest priority, and I'll do whatever is necessary to ensure it. But I don't think they'll be back. They're smart enough to know they won't get past me, and that girl they're looking for is officially dead anyway. They have no reason to think you're here." Willa wanted to believe him, but fear had settled cold in her stomach. She had felt safe here, had let herself relax and imagine a future. Now that security felt threatened and she hated it. That night, Holden moved his pallet closer to the door, his rifle and knife within easy reach. He barely slept, and every time Willa woke during the night, she could see him sitting up, watching the darkness beyond the windows. His vigilance should have made her feel better, but instead, it reminded her of the danger she had brought to his doorstep. In the morning, over breakfast, Holden was quiet and thoughtful. Finally, he set down his coffee and looked at her seriously. "I think we should get married sooner rather than later," he said. "If you're my wife, legally bound to me, you'll have more protection. And I want to make it official anyway. I want everyone to know you're mine to protect." Willa felt warmth spread through her chest despite her lingering fear. "I want that too. We'll go to Palisade tomorrow, find a preacher, get it done proper. Then anyone who comes asking questions will have to deal with the fact that you're a married woman with a husband who won't let anyone harm you." They spent the rest of the day preparing for the trip to town. Holden cleaned his rifle and checked his ammunition, his movements methodical and thorough. Willa packed a small bag with her few belongings, including the dress Holden had bought her, which she would wear for the wedding. She felt nervous and excited in equal measure. She was about to marry a man she had known for less than 2 months, but she had no doubts about her decision. Holden had shown her what protection and care looked like, had made her feel valued and safe in a way no one ever had. She loved him, deeply and completely, and she knew he loved her the same way. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Holden pulled something from his pocket. It was a simple gold ring, worn but well-maintained. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I have left of her. I want you to have it for our wedding." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "Holden, I can't take your mother's ring, it's too precious. She would have wanted you to have it, she would have liked you, I think. You're strong like she was, resilient." He took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "My mother made my father promise to always protect her and us kids. He kept that promise until his dying breath. I'm making the same promise to you now. I'll protect you with everything I have for as long as I live." Willa threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I love you so much." She felt him smile against her hair. "I love you too, more than I thought I could ever love anyone." They held each other for a long time, and when they finally pulled apart, Willa felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Holden James, and she would spend the rest of her life with a man who made her safety and happiness his highest priority. The ride to Palisade the next morning was beautiful, the summer sun warm on their backs as they descended from the high country. Holden had saddled his horse, and a gentler mare he sometimes used for packing supplies, and they rode side by side down the mountain trails. He was constantly vigilant, his eyes scanning the landscape for any signs of trouble, always positioning himself between Willa and any potential threat. When they reached Palisade, a small but growing town in western Colorado, Holden took them straight to the church. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, was happy to perform the ceremony, though he looked a bit surprised by the rushed nature of the request. "Any particular reason for the hurry?" he asked, his eyes moving between Holden's protective stance and Willa's shy smile. "We're ready to commit to each other before God," Holden said simply. "Don't see any reason to wait." The Reverend seemed satisfied with that answer. He called in his wife to serve as a witness, and within the hour, Willa and Holden were standing before the simple altar, speaking their vows. Holden's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her, to protect and provide for her all the days of his life. Willa's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her words were clear as she promised to love and honor him, to stand by his side through whatever life brought them. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Holden kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. In that moment, everything else faded away. The danger, the uncertainty of the future, none of it mattered. She was married to a man who loved her, who would protect her, who made her feel more valued than she had ever felt in her entire life. After the ceremony, Holden took her to the general store and bought supplies, more than they would normally need. "We'll stay up at the cabin for a while," he explained. "I don't want you coming down to town unless necessary, not until I'm sure those men have moved on for good." Willa agreed readily. She had no desire to leave the safety of their mountain home. They spent the night at the small boarding house in Palisade, in a clean room with a real bed, and Holden made love to her with the same combination of strength and gentleness that characterized everything he did. He was attentive and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and Willa fell asleep in his arms feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. They returned to the cabin the next morning, and life settled into a new rhythm. Willa was now officially Mrs. James, and she took pride in making their home comfortable and welcoming. She worked on sewing curtains for the windows, using fabric Holden had bought in town. She tended a small garden near the cabin, growing vegetables to supplement their diet of game and stored goods. She learned to cure meat and preserve food for the long winter ahead. Holden continued his work on expanding the cabin, and by late summer, he had added a separate bedroom and a larger kitchen area. The cabin felt more like a real home now, a place where a family could grow and thrive. They talked about children sometimes, late at night when they lay together in the darkness, and Holden would get a soft look in his eyes that made Willa's heart melt. "I want to be a good father," he told her one night. "Better than my own father was, though he wasn't bad. I just want to make sure any children we have know they're protected and loved every single day of their lives." "You'll be an amazing father," Willa assured him. "You already take care of me better than anyone ever has. You'll do the same for our children." As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of color to the aspen trees, Willa realized she might already be carrying Holden's child. She missed her monthly cycle and felt slightly nauseous in the mornings. She waited to tell him until she was sure, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. When she finally told him one evening in September, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had made it obvious. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his hands moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "I'm going to protect both of you. I promise. Nothing will ever harm either of you as long as I'm alive." Willa believed him. Over the past months, he had proven time and again that her safety was his highest priority. He had shown her what it meant to be protected, to be cherished, to be truly cared for. And now, he would extend that same fierce protection to their child. The winter of 1872 was harsh but manageable within the sturdy cabin Holden had built. He had stockpiled more than enough supplies to see them through, and he was extra careful whenever he had to go out in the snow to check traps or hunt. He never stayed gone longer than absolutely necessary, always rushing back to make sure Willa was safe and warm. As her pregnancy progressed, Holden became even more protective if that was possible. He barely let her lift anything heavy, and he would hover whenever she tried to do any strenuous work. It should have been annoying, but Willa found it endearing. This man, so strong and capable and self-sufficient, was utterly devoted to her well-being. In late winter, when the snow was still deep on the ground, Willa went into labor. Holden had planned for this, had talked to the doctor in Palisade months ago about what to expect and what to do. He had clean linens ready, water heating, and a calm determination that helped keep Willa from panicking during the long hours of labor. "You're doing so well," he told her, his voice steady and reassuring even as she gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You can do this." And she did. As dawn broke over the mountains, Willa delivered a healthy baby boy into Holden's capable hands. He wrapped the infant carefully and placed him in Willa's arms, his eyes suspiciously bright as he looked at his wife and son. "He's perfect," Holden said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're both perfect." They named him Henry, after Holden's father, and from the moment the baby drew his first breath, Holden made his son's safety and well-being as high a priority as Willa's. He was a devoted father, attentive and gentle despite his rough exterior. He would hold Henry for hours, the tiny baby cradled in his large arms, speaking softly to him about the mountains and the wildlife and the life they would build together. As spring arrived and Henry grew stronger, Willa felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her life. She had a husband who loved her fiercely, a son who was healthy and thriving, and a home where she felt safe and protected. After 19 years of never belonging anywhere, of never having anyone truly care about her well-being, she had found everything she had been missing. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the new porch Holden had built, watching the sun set over the mountains while Henry slept peacefully in his cradle, Willa reflected on how much her life had changed in less than a year. "You ever regret it?" she asked Holden. "Giving up your solitude to take in a stranger?" He looked at her as if she had said something ridiculous. "Not for one single moment. Finding you in those woods was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Henry, you're my whole world now. Everything I do, every decision I make, it's all about keeping you both safe and happy. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible," Willa said softly. "I spent my whole life never being anyone's priority, never having someone who truly cared about what happened to me. And then you came along and made my safety and well-being the most important thing in your world. Do you know what that means to someone who has never been protected before?" Holden reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold ring she wore. "You'll never have to worry about being unprotected again. For the rest of our lives, your safety and happiness will be my highest priority. That's not going to change." "I know," Willa said, and she did know. Holden had proven it every single day since the moment he found her. He had rebuilt his entire life around protecting her, around making sure she felt safe and valued and loved. It was who he was at his core, this need to protect and provide for the people he loved. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Willa leaned against her husband's solid shoulder and felt perfectly, completely at peace. She had found her home, her family, her place in the world. And she knew that no matter what challenges life brought, Holden would face them with her, would stand between her and any threat, would make her safety his highest priority every single day for the rest of their lives together. The years that followed were full and rich. Holden continued to work their land, hunting and trapping and making occasional trips down to Palisade to trade furs and buy supplies. Willa managed their home and raised Henry, who grew into a strong, curious boy who adored both his parents. She also gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Helen in 1874 and another son named Harold in 1876. Holden was equally devoted to all 3 children, teaching them about the mountains and wildlife, making sure they knew how to survive and thrive in their wilderness home. But he was especially careful about their safety, just as he had always been with Willa. He taught them to be cautious but not fearful, to respect the dangers of their environment while also appreciating its beauty. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and the once sparse mountain retreat became a warm, loving home filled with laughter and life. Willa often marveled at the transformation, both of the physical space and of herself. The frightened, unprotected young woman who had stumbled into Holden's life had blossomed into a confident wife and mother, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and cherished. Holden, too, had changed. The solitary mountain man who had lived alone with his grief and guilt for 12 years had become a devoted husband and father, channeling his need to protect into building a strong, happy family. The ghosts of his past, the family he hadn't been able to save, were finally at peace. He had found redemption in protecting Willa and their children, in creating a life filled with love and security. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1882, Holden took Willa up to a high meadow he had found years ago, before they met. They left the children with a trusted neighbor from Palisade and spent the day alone together, something they rarely got to do anymore with 3 active children. They sat on a blanket in the wildflower-filled meadow, the mountains rising majestically around them, and talked about their life together. Willa was 33 now, her dark hair showing just a few strands of silver. Holden was 40, his beard more grizzled but his body still strong and muscled from his active life. The years had been kind to both of them. "When I found you in those woods 10 years ago," Holden said, his arm around her shoulders, "I never imagined this. I thought I would help you heal, maybe help you get settled somewhere safe and then go back to my solitary life. I didn't expect to fall in love. I didn't expect to build a family. I didn't expect to be this happy. I didn't expect any of it either," Willa admitted. I had never known what it was like to have someone truly care about me, to make my safety and well-being their priority. You showed me what love really means, Holden. You made me feel protected and valued every single day. You still do. He turned to face her, his pale eyes intense as they always were when he looked at her. That will never change, Willa. Even when we're old and gray, I'll still be making your safety my highest priority. It's who I am. It's what loving you means to me. She kissed him then, deep and long, pouring all her love and gratitude into that connection. When they finally pulled apart, they lay back on the blanket and watched the clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky, content in the silence and in each other's presence. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they made their way back down the mountain to their cabin and their children. Henry, now 10, was teaching his younger siblings how to whittle, under strict supervision. Helen, 8, was chattering away about the birds she had seen that day. Harold, 6, was pretending to hunt with a stick as his rifle. Holden gathered all 3 children into a hug, and Willa watched with a full heart as her husband showered their children with the same protective love he had always shown her. This was what she had never known before Holden. A family that cared for each other, that protected each other, that made each other's happiness and safety the highest priority. That night, after the children were asleep, and she and Holden lay together in their bed, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened, unprotected girl running through the darkness to a loved wife and mother, secure in a home built on protection and devotion, the transformation was almost unbelievable. "What are you thinking about?" Holden asked, his arm tight around her waist. "About how lucky I am," she said honestly. "About how my life could have ended that night in the woods, but instead it began, because you found me, because you made me your priority." "I'm the lucky one," Holden countered. "You gave me a reason to live again, a reason to care about something beyond just surviving. You gave me a family, a purpose, a future. I thank God every day that I found you in those woods." They lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the mountain night outside their window and the soft breathing of their children in the next room. Willa felt completely at peace, completely safe, completely loved. She had everything she had never known she wanted, everything she had never dared to dream of. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Henry grew into a capable young man who helped his father with the hunting and trapping. Helen became a skilled herbalist and gardener, with a gift for healing that reminded Willa of Holden's gentle care when he had tended her injuries all those years ago. Harold inherited his father's strength and his protective nature, always watching over his mother and sister with the same devotion Holden showed. As Willa and Holden grew older, their love only deepened. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had raised 3 strong, capable children, had built a life together in the mountains that was rich with meaning and purpose. And through it all, Holden never wavered in his commitment to making Willa's safety and happiness his highest priority. When Willa was 52 and Holden was 60, they became grandparents for the first time. Henry, married to a kind young woman from Palisade, brought his infant daughter to meet them. Holding her granddaughter in her arms, Willa was struck by the profound gratitude she felt for the life she had been given. She looked across the room to where Holden sat with Henry, talking about the challenges of new fatherhood, and her heart swelled with love. This man, who had found her broken and afraid in the wilderness, had given her everything: protection, safety, love, family, purpose, home. He had made her well-being his priority every single day for over 30 years, and she knew he would continue to do so for however many years they had left together. That evening, after Henry and his family had returned to their own home, Willa and Holden sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The mountains were bathed in the golden light of sunset, and the air was sweet with the scent of pine and wildflowers. "We've built a good life," Holden said, taking her hand in his. "The best life," Willa agreed. "Because of you. Because you found me that night and decided my safety mattered. Because you made me your priority when no one ever had before." Holden brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Loving you, protecting you, making sure you're safe and happy, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. You changed everything for me, Willa. You gave me purpose and meaning and joy. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. Willa had never been protected before that night in the wilderness, but Holden had made her safety his highest priority every single day since. And in doing so, he had given her not just protection, but love, family, home, and a happiness she had never known was possible. Their story, which had begun with gunshots in the darkness and fear in the wilderness, had become one of love, devotion, and the profound peace that comes from knowing you are truly cherished and protected. It was a story of how one person's commitment to keeping another safe could transform both their lives, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. And it was a story that would live on in their children and grandchildren, a legacy of protective love that would endure for generations to come.